Hello, I'm Jack Cavanaugh, author of an American Family Portrait series. And on the 20th anniversary of the release of the first book in this series, I'm taking a look back at the making of the series and sharing with you some of my memories and some of the things that what I was attempting to do as I was writing the series. Now, as I began researching the entire series itself, I was struck with a realization, and that realization became one of the themes, overarching themes for the entire series of books. It was a startling realization. The realization was this, that we as a Christian people are one generation away from apostasy, from faithlessness, godlessness. If we don't share our faith to the next generation, within one generation, Christianity can die out. That's why I created the Morgan family tradition of passing a Bible down from generation to generation. It's not the passing of the Bible that is most important. You can't inherit somebody else's faith. What is important is, as the Bible is passed, a family ceremony takes place. And two important things happen in that ceremony. The first is that the family story is told. For the Morgans, it goes back to the first day that Drew Morgan met Bishop Laud, because that's what started the events going in his spiritual life. And so the telling of the family story is important because it reminds the family of their Christian roots. The second important thing, and the most important thing that occurs during the family ceremony, is a commissioning. Not only is the Bible handed down to the next generation, but the person's name is written in the front of the Bible and with a commissioning Bible verse for them, but just telling them that it's their responsibility now to see that the next generation of our family is aware of the teachings of Christ and follows the teaching of Christ. And so that commissioning takes place that makes sure that the next generation is one of faith. So The Colonists is a portrayal of this theme as I begin to develop it, and because the Morgan family is on the brink of becoming a godless family, one generation away from apostasy. The story takes place in the American colonies, 100 years following the Puritans. And the colonies have come a long way since Drew Morgan's day. No longer are they living in huts, but now they have great cities and very prosperous cities. The American dream of hard work and building for the future has taken root and is flourishing. And along with that prosperity comes a great temptation as well, because for some, prosperity means neglecting their spiritual roots. And the colonies are becoming increasingly secular in this day and age. The dream of creating a godly city upon a hill is dying out. It's being replaced by monuments of personal wealth and success. And so as you open the cover of the Puritans, this is the world that you are stepping into, a flourishing colonial world where the merchant class is rising and wealth is growing. The Morgan story begins with a funeral, a lost Bible, and a divided household. The funeral is that of Benjamin Morgan, the great-great-grandson of Drew Morgan. He has been killed tragically and suddenly while traveling, ambushed by an Indian and a sailor. And then it also is a lost Bible, because the Drew Morgan's Bible has been lost for a generation or so now, and the symbol of the Morgan family spiritual heritage is gone. And then Benjamin Morgan leaves behind him a divided household, because his three children cannot get along with one another. They're at odds with one another. They're seeking their own lives. Their father was the glue that held them together as a family and spiritually. So The Colonist is about Benjamin Morgan's three children. Philip is the oldest, and an academic, a student at Harvard with great promise. He leaves the school and leaves his fiancée behind to honor his father's dying wish as he goes in search of the Morgan family Bible. And his search leads him to some unusual places, and most notably a Narragansett Indian village, where he finds more questions than answers. The middle child, Priscilla, is a headstrong woman in a male-dominated society. Secretly, she has been learning how to read. Well, she has learned how to read and has been studying the Bible, even the biblical languages, Greek and Hebrew, under her father. But now that he is gone, she has no more outlet for these academic leanings that she has. So she starts her own Bible study for women and starts to teach women to read and to study the Bible for themselves. And this gets her into big trouble in those early colonial days. But she is fighting for a woman's right to be able to read the Bible for herself and to study it. Jared, the youngest, is very unlike his brother, his sister, and his father. Not an academic at all. He's the adventurer. He just wants to have an exciting life and finds ways to make it exciting if it's not. Well, one night he finds himself in the wrong place at the wrong time and is shanghaied aboard a pirate ship. And it is there that he learns about himself. It is there that he learns about how to be part of a cause that is greater than himself. I had fun with the settings in this particular novel. Not only do we have the colonies in the Narragansett Indian village, which were interesting, but a pirate ship. That was fun for me. Also a surprise. I wasn't planning on using a pirate ship. I was going to have Jared shanghaied aboard a merchant ship, which was not unusual in that day at all. And then in my research, I discovered something very interesting about the pirate ships over against the merchant ships. On merchant ships, society was well structured. Everything was structured. All the authority was structured on the ship, just like it was in society, in the colonies. And it was best for a person to know his place. On pirate ships, they elected their captains. In other words, we have the formation of democracies aboard pirate ships. And I learned that the democratic idea came from outlying territories and from pirate ships, not from the cities themselves. And so I had to include that. As far as having one of my good guys on a pirate ship, well, the pirate ship has a very definite Robin Hood quality about it. Some of the nicest group of guys you're ever going to want to meet. And so Jared is in good hands. One of the other things that I was particularly wanting to address and take a look at in the colonists was a unique event that was very significant in our national history. Remember when I told you how my publisher wanted me to start with the Revolutionary War and how I argued for starting 150 years before? One of the reasons I wanted to do that was because the Puritans were such a Bible-believing group, and they had such a significant effect on the founding of our country based upon the Bible, that I wanted to include that. But then also the second reason was for this book in the 1730s, because there was something else that happened here, which was phenomenal in our nation's history and not all that well known. Like the Morgan children, the colonies of that day were anything but united. The colonies did not get along with one another. To say that is an understatement. You could be put in jail or at times even strung up if you were from one colony and wandering into the wrong colony. So much did they despise one another. And if you were to tell them that 40 years from this point they would come together and form a united nation, they wouldn't have believed you. So what changed? You're familiar with the story about the shared grief over taxation, taxation without representation, the Stamp Act, the Tea Act, and all of that. But what is lesser known, but of a great significance in this time, was a national movement that occurred during this time, and it was spiritual in nature. It was revival, the Great Awakening. The very first great national movement in our nation's history was a spiritual revival, and it brought together the colonies, and it formed a basis for them to become a nation within 4 decades. Now, as a brief aside, I've written another series with Dr. Bill Bright of Campus Crusade for Christ, a 4-book series, and each of those books is set at a different time in our nation's history during a time of revival. Book number 2, Fire, is set during the colonial revival called the Great Awakening. Now, before we leave, I've got to tell you a couple of humorous incidents that I have associated with the colonists over the years. One was a radio interview that occurred while we were promoting the colonists. Out of Austin, Texas, a couple of psychologists took 1 week out of the year to have Book Week, and they would invite authors onto their show. And they invited me on there. And so on this live call-in talk show, I have 2 psychologists psychoanalyzing a dream sequence in the colonists. Have not had that done before. That was a lot of fun. And then what happened when they opened up the lines and invited callers to call in, one caller called in and said, "Hey, Jack, how are you doing? I haven't talked to you for a long time." And it was Elaine Schulte, a Christian romance writer, who I have known for years, and I hadn't known that she had moved to Austin, Texas. She heard me on the radio, and here we were in the days before cell phones, and we were having a long-distance chat with 2 psychologists listening in on the extension. That was a lot of fun. Then the other humorous incident that I have associated with the colonists is in the editing of it. I told you that Priscilla gets into trouble, and she is reprimanded publicly for her trying to teach women and holding a Bible study. She's put in the pillory in the town square, and the pillory is that stockade thing where you put your head through and the arms through. Well, because of the nature of her offense, they also put a cleft stick on the end of her tongue. It's like one of the old wooden clothespins, not the spring-loaded type, just the regular wooden clothespin. And so she had to be there. And so during the dialogue that I have with her, I wanted to write the dialogue as it would sound with someone who had a cleft stick attached to the end of her tongue. And so I took hold of my tongue, and I would talk about this way and create the dialogue and then try to spell what I was hearing. My editor got to that section of the book, and he said, "Jack, what are you doing here?" And I explained it to him, and he said, "Oh, that's a good idea." And so to edit it, he is sitting in his cubicle of the publishing house, and he's holding his tongue and reading through the dialogue. Well, there are people walking by, they see what he's doing, and pretty soon he has 6 or 7 people in his cubicle, and they're all standing around holding their tongues, reading the dialogue of Priscilla as she is talking to somebody while being in the pillory. And so that's a great mental image I have of the editing of the colonists. In upcoming audio episodes, I'm going to be telling you about one of my other characters, a world-class poet, 15 years old, and so I have to create poetry that is really, really good from the point of view of a 15-year-old girl, and I, at the time, am a 40-year-old balding man. I'll tell you how I went about that. And then also came across a recent news story about a man who had a 300-year-old Bible for his family stolen from him. An interesting story in the news. Those are upcoming audio episodes. So that just about does it for us here. I've enjoyed this time together. I hope you have too. Until next time, God's blessings.